We talk a lot around here about boundaries, about what healthy boundaries are, how to set your healthy boundaries, how to keep those boundaries, how to encourage other people to respect those boundaries. But what we haven't talked about yet is how to respect other people's boundaries. This actually came from a viewer who had pleaded with me to touch on this topic, to teach on it. And this person said, Julia, yeah, you talk so much about boundaries and how to keep our boundaries and set our boundaries and understanding what boundaries are. But could you please do a talk on how to respect other people's boundaries? And I thought this was such a great request. And I don't know why I haven't talked about it yet, because many of you know I've talked a lot about my own personal journey with boundaries and why this topic is so important to me and how I discovered it and how I kind of, got into boundaries once I I didn't discover boundaries, like I created boundaries, but I came across this whole concept of boundaries and how much it changed my life coming from, we'll say, relatively codependent, enmeshed family, and really understanding how to establish my own sense of self within that system and all the ups and downs and backs and forths that I went through myself, and then learning more about boundaries in different contexts and situations and teaching that to my students and to my clients and to those of you here on YouTube. So yeah, respecting other people's boundaries. It's one part of this process to set our own boundaries and to get comfortable with that and work through all the things that come up with us around that. It's not a small deal, it's a big deal, which is why I have an entire course on this and a comprehensive course on boundaries called Healthy Boundaries Bootcamp that many of you have already taken, and we get lots of great feedback from that one. But yeah, because it's such a deep topic that goes into our own resistance to boundaries, why we struggle with it, why we get into things like overfunctioning and people pleasing and doing things we're not comfortable with, and then becoming bitter and angry and resentful or depleted, stressed out, overwhelmed because we struggle so much with setting our own boundaries. There's so much more going on in our minds. And so that's one aspect of it. But then the whole other aspect of it is about how to respect other people's boundaries. And it feels great when we start being able to set our own boundaries. I'm going to tell you, it doesn't feel so great when we realize that we have to also start respecting other people's boundaries. It feels great to hold our own and to say what we're available for and not available for, and to get comfortable and confident in that and go through this process and come out the other side feeling stronger and more comfortable with who we are and holding our own space in this world and not feeling guilty or selfish because of that. But it's a whole other thing when other people start to set their boundaries and we're like, oh, I have to respect your space. I have to respect your limits. I have to respect your no. I have to respect your preferences. And sometimes those rub up against me and they don't necessarily work so well for me. What do we do with that? That's what we're going to talk about today. Stay tuned. This is an important one, and one that I think all of us need to understand better. Because if we want to have the freedom to set boundaries, we also need to give other people, extend that same respect and give other people the freedom to set their own. If you're new here, welcome to our incredible little corner on the internet. Take a second, introduce yourself in the comment section below. If you're back again, it is always good to have you. Special shout out to my shifters who are here and learning on this platform together with all of us right now. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. The button's about right down there. Like the video if you get something out of it. Super helpful for getting this in front of more people. That would be amazing. Either way, my name is Kristina, and I am a registered clinical therapist, a researcher, a coach, and the creator of my membership community, the Shift Society, where we are taking this work to a deeper level. You get ongoing support, tools, resources, accountability, and community. Get information about the Shift Society in the description. I help heart-centered humans break through the crap that is holding them back so that they can like themselves and their lives more every day. And I remember when I first discovered boundaries, as I was saying, I went through my own ups and downs with it. And I even got some significant pushback from my family with that. Oh, there goes Julia setting her boundaries again. because I was messing with the system, because there wasn't really space for people to kind of be more verbal, let's say, with their own preferences and not sort of going along with all of the family norms and expectations, and taking a step back and saying, does this even work for me? Is this even what I want? Does this align with my values as a human and what's important to me? Do I have my own sense of self outside of this family unit? And going through that whole process and getting to the point, doing a lot of my own work, where I allowed myself to start having some of my own boundaries, start respecting my wants, my needs, my preferences, my limits, what I'm comfortable with, what I'm not comfortable with, and respecting that within myself and setting my own boundaries accordingly, not just with family, but at work, with friends, in relationships, in every sort of aspect of life, and really just tuning more into myself and not neglecting that for the sake of what everyone else wanted all the time. And that was great. As I leaned into this process, went through my own journey with it, came out the other side feeling more comfortable and confident, being okay with the pushback from the family, letting them kind of be on their own journey and not letting it dissuade mine. And that was all working well until the rest of my family, or, kind of one at a time, the rest of them started getting hip to this whole idea of boundaries, maybe because I made it look too good. They started to see these changes in me feeling better about myself, feeling more confident, not feeling so overwhelmed and stressed out and resentful, because I was respecting my limits and, not experiencing those other things as much, because that's what happens when we share our boundaries, when we respect our own boundaries. And so they started to see this. I'm like, maybe this boundary thing isn't the kind of ridiculous thing that we thought it was before. And I remember my sister starting to understand boundaries and starting to have boundaries in her life. And me and my sister have always been really close and had a fairly intertwined relationship. But I had started setting more boundaries with her in order to, respect myself and my needs and my limits and all that stuff. And then she started getting hip to it, and she started setting her own boundaries. And I remember a few of the first times she did it, I was like, wait a second. That's not how we do things. That's not how this goes. I've been so used to it being like this, and now you're messing with it. And I was like, oh, there it is. There it is. I am experiencing what they went through, that discomfort of someone messing with the system. And I had to check myself for a minute and be like, okay, I want her to respect my boundaries. And if I want her to respect my boundaries, it's also my job to respect her boundaries, even if they make me uncomfortable, even if I don't fully understand them, even if they don't fully work for me and what I want. Her job isn't just to be there, to be what I want, to do what I want, to act how I want, right? To give what I want. That's not her job in this life, even in our relationship. That's not her primary role. And so what do we do? What are some steps that we can take for ourselves in order to start learning how to respect other people's boundaries? Because at first, I'm going to be honest with you, it can feel hard. I mean, I don't have to be honest with you. You probably already know that. When someone has set a boundary or a limit with you, it kind of hurts. You're like, you can't do that? You're not willing to do that? That doesn't work for you? You said no? Like, what? And it can feel rejecting, it can feel hurtful, it can feel disappointing, right? And so we need to check ourselves with that, because again, if we want them to respect our boundaries, it is up to us to also respect their boundaries. So what can we do? And the first thing we can do is we can communicate. When it comes to communication in our close relationships, oftentimes more is more, not less is more. Having more communication, seeking to understand where someone is coming from instead of making those assumptions, instead of saying like, oh, this person said no to going out and doing this thing with me. It must be because, they don't like me, or they don't have time for me, or I'm not important to them, right? Instead of asking and being like, okay, do you have something else going on that day? And they might just be like, I just really need some time to myself. I've been really overwhelmed and I just need some quiet time, and it has nothing to do with you, right? And so having that communication, maybe asking for a little bit more information, seeking to understand where someone is coming from instead of, again, making those assumptions. And this kind of ties into the next one that we are going to look at, and this is such an important one, and this one is learning how to accept someone else's boundary. We might not agree with it. We might not even totally get it, but it is important that we accept it, especially if it's, it's a boundary that's about them and their choices in their life. And it's not, them setting a boundary for us, or them saying that, like, my boundary is that you have to do everything that I want you to do whenever I tell you to do it. I mean, that's not a boundary if we're going to look at it, but if they were to use that kind of language, then it'd be like, no, I'm not respecting that boundary and I'm not accepting that boundary. But I digress. But really working on accepting that boundary instead of being like, you're wrong, you shouldn't have that boundary, right? That's not a reasonable boundary. I don't like that boundary. And giving you an example from my own life, I remember when my husband and I first got married, we had an issue around the bathroom door. So I, as an adult, well, as a child, as a teenager, and as a young adult, I lived with my sister. So I grew up with my sister in the same home. And then when we were young adults, we lived together in an apartment together. We've always been very close. We both talk a lot. And, our kind of unspoken rule, not even set rule, just sort of what happened, was that we wouldn't close the door when we went to the bathroom. Some of you might be totally disgusted by that. And, that's okay. Some of you are like, yeah, of course. Why would you? You don't want to stop the conversation. If you're having a conversation, you don't need to close the door. You're sisters. You've lived together forever. And, everyone pees. Like, what's the problem? It's nothing private. I mean, among close people that are close to each other. And so we never closed the bathroom door. It was just, why would you bother taking that extra 0.5 seconds? I don't know. So then when my husband and I started living together, we had known each other for a long time, obviously very close with each other. I mean, there's no secrets about what a human body looks like or the functions of a human body. I wouldn't close the bathroom door when I went to the washroom. And he didn't like this. He thought it was, quite frankly, gross. And he wasn't comfortable with it. And I remember him telling me it and me being like, that doesn't make any sense. Every human body does this several times every single day. It's actually good. It means you're in good health if you are actually, getting rid of the waste from your body. That's a sign that your systems are working well. It's not a problem. It's okay. Just get over it. And he was like, no, this bothers me. Can you please close the door when you go to the washroom? And I was like, okay. I don't need to understand it. I don't need to get it. I don't need to agree with it. But you have made this request. It's important to you. And so I'm going to accept and respect it. And now I close the door and have for several years. We've been together for a very long time. So I do close the door now. I still don't get it. I still don't fully understand it. It's not how I see things. It's not what's important to me, but it is what it's important to them or to him. And the same thing, there's probably things that are important to me that I've asked of him that he doesn't totally get or he doesn't totally agree with or doesn't make sense to him, but he's like, okay, that's important to you and I am going to respect that. Another way that we need to respect other people's boundaries is that we need to respect their autonomy for their own life. Especially if they are fully functioning adults who are going through life making their own decisions. I know this can especially be hard for parents of adult children to kind of let them go out on their own, make their own mistakes, go through their own pain, struggle, do things that you wouldn't necessarily do. And it's not to say that you can't offer your feedback or your suggestions or your advice if they are open to it, but also learning to release other human beings to make their own decisions for their own lives. This is actually something that's come up several times in my membership community, the Shift Society, with parents of adult children. Several of the members have been parents of adult children who have gone through this. Of course, we have people from all ages and walks of life. And I think we've got 32 countries represented in the membership group. So people from all different walks of life, all different ages, all different backgrounds. But there have been parents who have really struggled with releasing their adult children to be autonomous over their own lives. And I'm not saying that it's easy, and I'm not saying that you should just wash your hands of it and just say, make your own decisions for your own life, good riddance, but being able to hold them loosely, meaning that you're still there for them, you still love them, you still support them, you still want the best for them, but you're not anxiously trying to control them. You're not pushing them away by being overbearing and kind of putting all of your emotional stuff on them, all your fears on them, all your worries on them, giving them their own autonomy for their own life. And this doesn't just have to be parents of adult children, anyone, your partner, maybe even your own parents who you struggle with, and you're trying to get them to be a certain way and get them to live their lives a certain way. It can be friends, it could be anyone. And how you know that you are perhaps not respecting someone else's autonomy is that you are getting very anxious around their decisions and trying to get them to make different decisions for their own lives when they have made it very clear that that is not the decision they want to make. When you find yourself trying to impose your will, trying to get them to do something a certain way, and you're finding yourself getting really stressed out and anxious about it, that means that you are not giving them space, that you are getting too emotionally interconnected with their stuff. And that, we could call that, because it is, codependence. Right? We are needing someone else to be a certain way so that we can be okay. So we are projecting our own anxieties onto them to try to get them to change so that we don't have to feel anxious, instead of respecting other people's autonomy. They are allowed to make parenting decisions that you don't agree with. They're allowed to make career decisions you don't agree with. They're allowed to make relationships decisions that you don't agree with. I mean, obviously within limits of violence or, just common sense here. If anyone's but what if they're hurting their child? And I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about different choices that you're making for yourself and your family and your life and your career and your relationships, and, what kind of birthday cake you want to make yourself for your birthday. If you're I'm going to make myself a vanilla cake, and the person's you have to make a chocolate cake. Chocolate is way better. Leave the person alone to make their vanilla cake for their own birthday. Respecting other people's autonomy, which goes nicely into our next one, is to please don't coerce people into changing their mind once they've set a firm boundary. Now, that's different between your friend that's you know what, I don't want to go out, I'm having a bad hair day, or, my cute clothes don't fit me as well. I just don't want to go out. And if you're you know what, no, come on, you need to get out. You need to go do something fun. We need to spend some time together. You need to get some fresh air. You need to be around people. Come on, it'll be great. Put on that dress that always looks fantastic on you, and just throw your hair in a bun, or, put on a hat, or whatever it is, and let's go, right? That's that kind of coercion when you're looking out for the person's best interest, and you're this is something we need to do, and that person needs that gentle, loving nudge, which actually kind of reminds me of just a few weeks ago. I was camping with some friends, and I have tried, so where I live in Vancouver, everybody does stand-up paddleboarding, and I mean, not everybody, but it's a big thing here, and I've always wanted to do it, but not enough to take the time to go down and rent it and get out onto the water and do the whole thing. But I have tried it a couple times with friends who have had a paddleboard, and maybe the water that I've been on to start learning has always been a bit too choppy, because I've never been able to stand up and feel just sort of sturdy as I stand on the paddleboard. But I was camping a few weekends ago with some friends, and someone had a paddleboard there, and one of my friends that I was camping with, he was get on, Julia, go and do it. I'm no, I'm okay. This water in this lake was freezing cold. I'm I don't want to fall off and go into the water. And he's no, you can do it. He's you are strong, you are athletic, you can obviously do it. And so he was get on there. I'm okay, okay, fine. And I got on there, and he held the back of it, and I kind of tried to stand up. I'm it's wobbly. I can't do it. I'm not going to be able to stand up. He's just plant your feet, spread them wide, hold solid, and go. And he held it steady while I got on there, got myself steady, got myself, feeling kind of comfortable. And then he just pushed me off, and away I went. And I was stand-up paddleboarding, and I went all around the lake. I mean, it helped that the lake was like pure glass and not a ripple in it. But I did it. And so I was grateful for that push, and that he was kind of like, no, you got this, you can do it, I'll help you, I'll support you, and now I'm going to send you off to figure it out. And it was great. But I'm talking more about people who are just like, you know what? I'm not okay with that. I don't like that. I don't want that. Please stop that. And we're like, oh, whatever. You don't really mean it. It's not really that important. And they're like, no, this is important. I've asked you. I don't like to be yelled at. I'm not comfortable talking about this. This isn't okay with me. Please stop. And then you keep going. And the person keeps going and keeps going and tries to get them to change their mind, or just sort of like bulldozes right over the boundary in the first place. If someone has set a firm boundary, they have made it clear that this is a firm boundary, please respect that. Even if you don't get it, even if you don't agree with it, even if you don't understand it, they have said it for a reason that's important to them. And going back to step one, ask questions, seek to understand why they've said it, instead of telling them that their boundary shouldn't be there, that they're not allowed to have it, that it's unreasonable, or that you don't like it, and so therefore it must not be. It's not your job. It's hard to start respecting other people's boundaries, especially when we haven't been used to them having boundaries. But it is important for the sake of a relationship, for having a healthy relationship. Every healthy relationship has a degree of autonomy and has space to exist with one's own wants, needs, preferences, and limits, and to be able to also respect that with the other person in the relationship. If you want a quick but thorough and comprehensive way to understand what boundaries are and how to get in there and start working on having, setting, keeping your own boundaries, and also respecting other people's boundaries, which comes from really understanding what boundaries are and why people set them and why it's so important to set them, then make sure you grab my book, Drive Your Own Darn Bus. The link is below. You can also get it at most major book retailers worldwide, Amazon, Chapters Indigo, Barnes & Noble. Drive Your Own Darn Bus is my book. There's a whole big section in there on boundaries, and it's really going to make all of this make more sense and equip you with tools to be able to set your own clear but kind, respected boundaries. Make sure you grab that. Get on the wait list for the Shift Society. Let me know what connected with you. As always, it is great to have you here. Take good care of yourself. Take good care of those around you. See you soon.